Okay, first thing we went over in the biology unit, cell theory. How many points to the cell theory? 3. All organisms are made up of cells. Cells carry out the basic functions of the organism. Cells reproduce by splitting in half, not by being like produced in a factory somewhere. Okay? Everybody follow me on that. Okay, which one of those 3 is the most important, or sorry, not the most important, the one that gets used most often when you're explaining other things? Nope. Second thing, cells carry out the basic functions. That was the cell anatomy lab, right? The purpose of the cell anatomy lab is to figure out which cell structures were most important, okay? And when we talked about surface area and volume ratios and a cell being able to survive if it gets big was all about being able to carry out those basic functions. One of those basic functions is cell transport, okay, by diffusion, and that doesn't work if a cell gets too big. So we kept coming back to this idea that cells are important because they carry out basic functions. So find a way in questions that are about cells to work that in, okay? I mean, unless it doesn't fit, but I mean, in most cases, you can find some way to legitimately work that into an answer, all right? So remember those 3 points. Could that be a multiple choice item? Could be a multiple choice item. Okay, there could be a couple of things about the cell theory. Remember, there were really only 4 people that we were concerned with on this, okay? And that was Hooke, who discovered the cells, Leeuwenhoek, who looked at the living cells, and then Schleiden and Schwann go together, okay? But again, I'm a lot less concerned about trivia, okay, on the test than I am with your understanding of things. Okay, so cell theory, okay, so written response, kind of basic functions is the important part there. Okay, the rest will be multiple choice kind of items. Okay, second thing that we went over, okay, was modes of nutrition. What were the 2 modes of nutrition? Anyone remember? Photoautotrophs, chemoheterotrophs, right? So photoautotrophs can produce their own food using photosynthesis. Okay, autotrophs in general can produce their own food using whatever. Okay, most autotrophs are photoautotrophs, but there are actually a few chemoautotrophs, believe it or not. Okay, we don't talk about them because they're very rare. And then chemoheterotrophs is anything that consumes another organism for its food. Okay. Now we said the importance of the modes of nutrition was it was the cause of cellular structure. Whoop, my U looks like a C there. Differences. Okay, why plant cells look different than animal cells. Okay, to simplify that. Okay, that's why plant cells look different from animal cells. They have different structures because they have different modes of nutrition. That was something you were asked to explain on your unit exam. Okay, so it is probably an important concept. It may not be a written response item on the final just because the final is longer, covers more stuff, so it may get worked into a couple of multiple choice questions. All right, that same day that we talked about the different modes of nutrition, we did the cell diagrams. Label and give the function of all cellular structures. Okay, you were asked to do that on the written part of your unit exam. It's not in the written part of the final. Okay, it's all in the multiple choice this time. But I still ask for, like, what's the structure, what's the function of structure number 4? Or what would happen to a cell if structure number 5 was damaged? Or things like that are ways for me to ask what's the function of this structure. Okay, and then of course there'll be what is structure number 2? Okay. Oh, it's the cell membrane or it's the cell wall or whatever. Okay, everybody follow there. So there's a few of those in the multiple choice, so be sure that you go over your cell diagram and that you can label all the parts. Okay, and then with that giving the functions part, we talked about the function of the cell. Okay, we had that big long lesson, lesson 5. Okay, was on cell function and transport. That's important. There are several written response items on the final exam that will in some way be cell transport associated. Okay, there's one that's all about cell transport, but there's a couple other ones that have it, that it would be useful if you talked about whatever cell transport method is most applicable in your written response answer. Okay, now on your unit exam, okay, the way I talked about that, are the questions I gave you were, I had the picture of the slugs on the front. Okay, and the question was why is going to the Great Salt Lake vacation disaster, right? Well, because when they go into the Salt Lake, there's all this salt, okay, in the lake, and that's going to cause what cellular transport process? Osmosis, because there'll be an imbalance of salt. Water will be drawn out of the slugs to balance the salt concentrations. Okay, things like that. So look for similar types of questions. I still want to know pretty much the same things. Do you still know what osmosis is? Can you still identify that this is a situation where osmosis will happen, or where active transport will happen, or where diffusion will happen? Okay. All right. So let's say this is going to be a lot of written response, but there could also be a few multiple choice, but I would say more marks in the written. Okay. Greater than, right? All right. So yeah, definitely have a look over this one or watch that podcast again or something. Okay, that would be an important one to do. Okay, and then number 5, we talked about cell size. Okay, that was the cube activity that we did. Here where we had like macro, micro, and multi-micro, and we were figuring out, you know, that a multicellular organism has advantages over an equally sized single-celled organism because diffusion is really slow and it's not targeted, and as a result a large single cell will have difficulty transporting materials effectively within its cytoplasm, blah blah blah. Okay, that's an important concept. There is a written response item directly on that concept on that lab, so make sure you go over that. Okay, so obviously then diffusion is part of that. And then we moved on to plants. Oh, sorry, we talked about multicellularity first. One key word that separates a multicellular organism from a group of cooperating cells. What is it? Specialization. Compartmentalization is the difference between a eukaryotic and a prokaryotic cell, but it's still an important word. Okay. All right. Specialization. Okay. That is differentiation of tissue. All right. In a multicellular organism, there will be cells that look different in structure than other cells within that same organism because they have specialized to perform a certain job. In a colony of cooperating cells, the cells are all identical. Okay. On the note of compartmentalization in prokaryotes and eukaryotes, all multicellular organisms contain what kind of cells? Eukaryotes, because only eukaryotic cells with their compartmentalization can become specialized. The only way a cell becomes specialized is to essentially make more of a certain organelle or change a certain cellular structure. If you don't have cellular structures like a prokaryotic organism, you can't become specialized. Okay, then we talked about plant structure. Okay, so, you know, definitely know what all the parts do, you know, the roots and the leaves, okay, and the stem. Okay, the leaf layers. Right, so we got the waxy cuticle and the epidermis and the palisade layer and the spongy layer, right? The phloem and xylem and okay, the stomates. Okay, know what all those are and what they do, because there will definitely be a written response item that will ask you to incorporate the jobs of all of these structures into how a plant functions, because that was how we looked at specialization in a multicellular organism. Okay, the cells within the leaf were all different. The palisade cells were structured so they were full of chloroplasts and long and narrow. The cells in the stomates were structured so they were shaped like a bean, but as they lost water, could close the hole between them. Okay, things like that. That is our best example of specialization of cells in a multicellular organism, and it's something you'll want to use in your explanation of that kind of thing on the final exam. Okay. Plant transport. Okay, so when we're talking about plant transport, okay, phloem and xylem, polar nature of water. And what else? Osmosis, yeah. Remember, it's that evaporation of water from the leaves that causes the concentration of salt in the spongy layer to increase, which draws water out of the xylem, which draws water up from the roots because they're all connected by hydrogen bonds, okay, cohesion and adhesion down the xylem. That's what creates that pulling action that can bring water up to the top of the tree or plant or whatever. Okay, so certainly something we spend a lot of time on. We did a lab on it. Okay, so it's probably something that would be worth some marks in both sections, but again, probably more in the written. Yes, everyone makes their own. Yeah. I mean, we sit down and kind of look at each other's, and sometimes we share questions, but everyone makes their own. But we do always sit down and check and make sure, okay, you know, I don't want mine to be like way harder than yours, right? So we sit down and we actually look at each other's tests and go, okay, those seem like they're pretty much the same level of difficulty. I can't think of a single time where we've ever said, you got to fix your test because yours is too easy or too hard. So, yeah. Okay. Number 9, we are looking at plant growth and development. Okay, so in plant growth and development, we talked about the plant hormones. Okay, about auxins, about gibberellins, cytokinins, abscisic acid, I never spell that right, ethylene, ethylene. Okay. We also talked about tropisms. Okay, so tropisms, okay, there were 3 of them. What were they? Anyone remember? Thigmotropism, phototropism, geotropism. Which one's most important? Phototropism, because that's the one that gets them to their food source, right? Okay, geotropism would be our second most important, and thigmo would kind of be last. All right, so photo, geo, and Thigmo. All three of those are caused by the same mechanism. Anyone remember what that mechanism was? What makes the plant curve? Yeah. Right. Cells on one side grow faster than they do on the other. Okay. Generally, they get longer on one side. Not necessarily more cells on one side than another, but longer cells and growing faster. Which hormone is going to cause that? Oxidants. Okay. Okay. There's going to be a lot in the multiple choice about this. It doesn't mean that there isn't something in the written, but there's more in the multiple choice about that, okay, than there is in the written. So just be ready for pictures and things like that for that part. Austin, question? 2 hours. Okay. All right, anything you want me to go over in particular for bio or questions for bio? No, just active transport in general uses energy, pumps against the gradient from low to high concentration. Yeah, I'm not worried about the, receptor mediated, and because those actually aren't active transport, those are changes in the structure of the membrane as opposed to a pump. Okay, so don't get those ones confused, guys. Okay, don't confuse the endocytosis. Okay, endocytosis was like phagocytosis, pinocytosis, and receptor mediated. Those all involve the membrane engulfing something. Okay, so if, like, here's the cell, right, and something touches the cell, so the cell folds in around it, engulfs it, and then it ends up inside the cell. That's a membrane structural change, and in active transport, the membrane doesn't change. It pumps stuff actively across using energy, but it doesn't change shape. Yeah. That I have to look up. I think 137. So there's 87 marks in the written on 15 questions. I think it's 15. Okay, and there's 50 multiple choice questions. Okay, now some of the questions have like an A and a B and a C, like in the chemistry unit, right? Where there's like, okay, question 1, A, B, C is all balancing, right? It's like 3 balancing questions. And then after that, there'd be A and B for reactions, predicting in products, writing the reaction, whatever. Okay, and then there'll be like, mole equation questions. Well, that's going to be 2 separate, like A and B kind of things. Okay, so know that some of the questions are split up into A and B. So one question could be out of 8 marks if it's like 2 mole equations, or 9 marks, okay? Or it could be out of 8 marks if it's 2 reaction questions, or like an A and a B. So it gets, the marks pile up. It makes it sound like there's a lot in there, but some of the questions, it's quick marks, right? It's writing out, oh, I wrote the reactants right, that's a mark. Well, those are quick marks as opposed to I have to write out a whole paragraph to get 4 marks, okay? And while there's some of that, obviously in the biology part, it's not, as big. You got the physics part, okay, that's just, show your mark, show your steps for marks. And then there's the chemistry part, show your steps for marks. And in the global systems, you got a latent heat problem. So, okay, that's quick marks on each step, but it's worth a lot of marks. A question like that can be an 8-mark question, right? So the marks kind of pile up quickly in there. Okay, everyone follow on that? Okay, anything else for bio? That was a good one, the transport question there. Sam? Oh, estimating the size? Okay. So estimating the size of an object. So let's say here's the circle that I can see through, let's say, the high power lens. Okay. The field of view on my high power lens is 400 micrometers. That means the distance from this side to this side is 400 micrometers. Okay. And that's mu, remember. Okay. If you just use a U, that's fine. Okay. Now let's say I'm looking at this thing. About how big is that? Yeah, you know what? I would say I would accept probably anything between 100 and 150 micrometers as a reasonable estimate for the size of that object. Because remember, we do have to measure it on its longest dimension. Okay, if I put it across there, you know, it's and then let's see how close we are on our 150. Yeah, that's not bad, right? Because it's not 3 across, right? And it's a little more than 2, so they're not 200 micrometers either. So 150 is probably a pretty good estimate for that. Okay, that good? Okay, what else? Don't be afraid to ask, guys. Okay, Cody, well. Okay. I would say that's something you should probably review on your own, but I'll go over like quick, dirty kind of here. Yeah. Okay, so this was one of the quizzes you guys wrote, right? Okay, so we got, I don't want that. What the heck is going on here? Okay, paying attention here, guys. All right, so we got, for our cell here, okay, this is the plant cell, obviously. Okay, so structure number 1, right, we're looking at the cell wall, which is just a frame. It only supports the shape of the cell, and that's kind of the common mistake people make. Okay, they say something like protects the cell or something. It doesn't. It's just a frame to hold the shape of the cell. Okay, can it do it on its own? No, it needs help from structure number 5, which is the water vacuole, which uses turgor pressure, okay, in order to push everything against the cell membrane and against the cell wall and keep the shape. We got rough ER here is number 3, and that transports proteins and things like that. The smooth ER, which is number 4, okay, has all kinds of functions. It breaks down complex carbohydrates, detoxifies poisons, makes hormones and fats and things like that. The mitochondria would be number 6. That's your powerhouse of the cell that burns your sugars for energy using cellular respiration. 7 would be your chloroplast, which makes sugar using photosynthesis. You got your Golgi apparatus here is number 11, which is getting rid of waste and helping with exocytosis. Number 10 is the cell membrane, which controls endo and exocytosis. Okay, 12 is your nucleolus. The nucleolus copies DNA, okay, in order to control protein synthesis, right? Number 2 is just the nucleus, which stores your DNA. Number 9 is the cytoplasm, without which diffusion would be impossible. It's that fluid that fills up the cell. And then you got, well, shouldn't really have those in this one, but okay, that would be cytoskeleton, okay, the fibers and stuff, the microfibers, microtubules, and filaments and things, okay? And then in the animal cell, the other structures that would be different would be the lysosomes, peroxisomes, and centrioles, okay, and of course the lack of a cell wall and chloroplasts. All right, what else? Any other questions there, guys, for bio? Cody? Polar nature of water. Okay, so water is a polar molecule because it looks like Mickey Mouse, right? Okay, hydrogens are not very electronegative. Oxygen is very electronegative, which means oxygen holds onto electrons harder than hydrogen does. So even though each one of these hydrogen atoms, has one electron, that electron spends way more time here around the oxygen, here around the oxygen, than it does around the hydrogen. So the top ends up having essentially 2 protons exposed. Okay, because those protons are positive, it makes it look like the top ends of the molecule are positively charged. And because the 2 electrons from there hang out down here more often, it makes it look like these 2 ends are negative. Okay, polar means different at both ends. So positive on the top, negative on the bottom, and then you can get hydrogen bonds forming between this water molecule and other water molecules because of the positive negative attraction. Cohesion is water on water, adhesion is water to another polar molecule. Yes. Okay, how strong are these hydrogen bonds? They're weak, right? But they can reform easily. So, okay, that's probably a good one to review because we didn't talk about that in the chem very much. All right, what else? Okay, so plant structure, basically you just got to read over the roots do this. Okay, the roots absorb water and minerals for the plant. The stem is mainly for transport and to support the foliage or the photosynthetic part. Okay, the leaves are the photosynthetic organs of the plant. They collect and perform photosynthesis and transport sugars down to the roots, which can't carry out photosynthesis themselves. So yeah, just kind of that basic stuff. And then the structures of the leaf, the palisade layer is the layer that does all the photosynthesis. The waxy cuticle protects against evaporation. The epidermis secretes that. The spongy layer is where water and carbon dioxide and oxygen are exchanged, right, through the stomates, because the stomates usually open to the spongy layer. Stomates are on the bottom, right? The stomates are the guard cells that open and close. Okay, that's quick and dirty, but make sure you go over that in a little more detail. Don't write it like that on the test. Okay. All right, what else? Okay, studying for bio. Remember that studying for bio is poring over your notes repeatedly. Okay, very much different from studying for chemistry and physics. So yes, pour over your notes, look at your diagrams, look at your labs. Okay, there's not like there's worksheets or assignments or anything in that. You just had some labs. So make sure you look over those and the notes, watch the podcasts. Okay, look at your quizzes. If you had a quiz that you didn't do well on, then try it again. Watch the podcast of it, see if you do it well. Okay, the second time, but make sure you make use of those resources. Okay. All right. Well, you still have a couple of minutes. You got about 8 or 9 minutes here, so you can do a little work on your own. Okay, with that final exam review package that I put on Google Classroom last week. Okay, or whatever you want to do for review here. Anything but visiting idly.